the goal of this talk is really what we had wished we could tell ourselves on day one of starting this journey. So Andrew is the CISO at Datadog. I'm the former CISO at Etsy and now the co-founder of Signal Sciences. And prior to that, we were both the really early consultants at ISEC Partners, which is now NCC Group, which I don't even know if I'm allowed to say ISEC Partners now. So the goal of this is really, hey, you're somewhere on the continuum of this journey. What are the lessons learned that we had out of that, and what can we share that really would have helped us? So for security teams, for organizations really at large, the world is really changing in three fundamental ways for us. The first is that we're watching this trend of software deployment going towards continuous, right? And we're seeing well, I think plenty of us here lived through what I will call the bad old days of waterfall. And we're watching this go towards agile, and we're watching it go towards continuous. And so that really changes a lot of things for us. The big thing for security here is that security is no longer the gatekeeper for deployment, right? It used to be, hey, we're in waterfall, we got to kick this over the fence to QA, get it back, we kick it over the fence to security, we get it back, or they say no to a bunch of things, and then we eventually get something going on there and we get it out to production. The difference is that the means of deployment are now in everyone's hands, and so security being a blocker just means it gets routed around, right? Treat it like IP, like it's built to route around damage. If security is blocking the deployment process every time, it's damage that you route around. And so this really changes the way in which we have to approach security. So what do I mean? We're going to kind of touch on all of these. What do I mean when I say near instantaneous deployment and everything like that? I know it's the afternoon, but I'm going to give you a highly technical flowchart of what waterfall looks like here next, so we can all go through this. Okay, so what you see here is you shovel the code onto the code wagon. It fords the QA river, and then it gets cholera somewhere in staging and never quite makes it to production. I appreciate the laughter on that, because that joke does not land in Moscow, by the way, whatsoever. There is no humor found in that one. So what are we actually headed towards on this? So I'm going to give you some examples from Etsy, just because those are the numbers I know off the top of my head. But Etsy deploys to production on average 50 times a day, right? You can ballpark it at that. What does it look like? Well, I'll show that in a second. The shift here is the constant iteration is now happening in production, right? All these things where you're like, hey, we've got 5 different design ideas for this feature. Let's try them out. That conversation was always in development and in staging. Now that's in production, and you have 5 different versions of the site running at any given time that are being A/B tested between, or one's feature flagged on for 5% of your traffic, and another is feature flagged on for 20% of your traffic. So how do you deal with the fact that when attacker A hits the application, they might get a different version of the application than attacker B, then pen tester C, and defender D, right? And so it really changes the model for you on that regard. So what was my face on day one of landing in this environment? Again, a highly technical document here. Because day one, it's like, okay, this is great. I'll be at the security whiskey booth over here, just drinking heavily and crying. And the reality of what you get to out of this is not only do you switch from whiskey to Kool-Aid, you actually stand up here and dispense the Kool-Aid about this. And you say, actually, the biggest lesson learned I had out of that, and I think this is a theme you're ideally hearing from every talk today, is that this shift to whatever we're calling it, right, the broader theme of DevOps and Agile and continuous and everything here, it sounds scary. It actually makes you safer, right? And we had to go through this journey and learn this as a super hard lesson ourselves, but I'll show you very clearly why in just a second here. But the number one theme I hope you take away from really this entire day is that this shift towards velocity makes us quicker. Right, or makes us quicker, makes us safer. So the key there, the lesson learned that we had to kind of have is that vulnerabilities occur no matter what your development methodology is. Right? If you're writing waterfall, it doesn't mean that you have no bugs. Right? If we go back and look at all the applications of bugs, I heard some good laughter from someone there who's definitely lived through waterfall. If you live through that, you know that it doesn't magically take away bugs. We have bugs in every development methodology. The key here in this shift towards agile and continuous in DevOps is that there's no longer this out-of-band patch idea. right? How many people have actually lived through waterfall and know that phrase out of band patch? Can I get some hands? Right. So you know the pain of that. We never got to throw a party that this phrase is going away, but we should. Because the fact that when there's some emergency issue, you don't have to go wake everyone up. You get everyone in the office for 2 weeks as you organizationally figure out how to actually deploy new software. One of my co-founders who's in the audience here has a great story about how at a prior employer a while ago, there was a typo, like just a typo on the marketing page up front. And they went to the engineering team and they're like, no, we can't deploy, that's too risky to fix it. Like fixing a typo on the marketing site was too risky because no one really knew how to deploy if it wasn't on their 18-month release cycle. And so we lived this very early on at Etsy where if you notice the bolded word in this sentence, former vendor. And the key here of why I put this up is not only because it just deeply amused me, but also because this is the expectation that we're going towards, is that if you can't react, like that's no longer the norm, that's now the exception, right? And so the story behind this was actually really amusing to us because it was just a cross-site scripting issue in the search box of like a third-party vendor that we were using. It's like the most default issue. If you're going to test for one issue on a site, this is the one thing you would test, and it was right there. And we're like, okay, hey, can you guys fix this? Like, not a big deal, but can you knock it out? And they're like, yep. It escalated up to the CTO, and they're like, we will drop everything and rush this out. It will go out in 6 weeks. And it's like, okay. We didn't sell all the security whiskey, it turned out, so that was good for days like that. So what actually makes this safe? If I have to give it to you in a word, and it's a 20-minute talk, so I do, it's visibility, right? And so what do I mean by that? Let me give you some examples. So these are some of the famous, like Etsy dashboard, industry famous for them, like dashboards across a wide variety of things. And what I loved about this at Etsy was it wasn't just a specific technical focus. There were business metrics on here, there were technical metrics on here, there were release metrics on here, all these sort of things. And so I and I love that this was in the previous deck too. I love the comparison to aviation because you can fly a plane without any of those instruments, right? You can deploy software, you can go embrace continuous and agile without any visibility. The problem is in aviation, when things start shaking and you're up there, you don't know if the engine's on fire or if it's just turbulence, if you don't have any instrumentation. And so it's the same lessons really applied to release engineering, to continuous, and finally, we're getting there to security as well. And I'll give you one kind of, in closing, I'll give you a practical example here, which is, if you're living through this shift into agile and continuous and DevOps, I'll give you a scenario that you probably lived through already a lot of times. If you're headed that way, here's what's coming, which is you've got groups that are deploying quicker now, and errors start appearing in their logs because they just deployed something. And the challenge becomes, hey, like you get paged by that team if you're a security group that says, hey, we just noticed some errors appearing. We don't actually know if those have been there forever or what. Is somebody attacking us right now? And that conversation goes from happening every 18 months when you release to multiple times a day, to so often where the scale of it just becomes untenable. And so what you get to, we tried a million things to try to alleviate this. The number one lesson learned that we had out of it was giving visibility into what's going on in your environments. This is what actually enables you to move safely, quickly. And so taking this sort of visibility and bringing this here, and the real key out of this is not just bringing this, not just giving the security team a shiny new toy, but bringing this visibility to everyone is what allows you to move quick, right? If you look at from a glance of DevOps, meaning this whole merge between development and operations and all these groups, it's the same thing for security. You can't have security tools that are just in isolation anymore because everyone needs to be able to be a part of it. And so thinking back to kind of that earlier metaphor, having to talk to security about all this causes delays, and delays get routed around. And so the final point is that to really embrace agility and not have security being the one saying, no, slow down, we can't do this, it's too risky, we can't do this. How security actually leads the way and says, yeah, let's move quicker. It's even better if we can do that, is by decentralizing visibility and decentralizing these capabilities. So with that, I'm gonna hand it to Andrew to talk through some fun stuff.
All right. And so talking about DevOps and continuous release, one of the nasty storm clouds that comes up is something Zane already touched on, and that's that we lose gating. So a lot of us have worked or at least know about places that had really strict release cycles, right? And you had to get sign off in triplicate on Form D in order to, get your line by line code review and do all of your testing. And so if we're not going to have that kind of strong gating anymore, well, how do we get, whatever insert your assurance is required? Well, the thing I'd bring up is, did we ever really have whatever insert your assurance was? Even in the days of more structured release, delays were routed around like damage, right? In terms of out-of-band releases or just people pushing code in ways that weren't necessarily known about by the security team. And so, the idea being that, and to roughly paraphrase Robert Kennedy, right? Many people are downright afraid of the future, and they're suspicious of the present, and they long for a safe and secure past that never really existed, right? I think a lot of us are inoculated against that as security professionals because we remember how bad the past actually was. So we actually do have some reasons to be optimistic, but a lot of other people, cling to that idea of rigid release cycles, preventing software with flaws that have security impact actually making it out. But let's do better. We can do better. And so this is where, as opposed to showing graphs and charts and automation, I remind everyone that all problems eventually boil back down to people problems. And that if we're ever going to solve the problems that we have to get people on board. And so there have been many, very regimented and structured approaches to driving security knowledge out into our organizations, whether it's, security satellites or champions or stars and structured training programs, computer-based training. But unfortunately, they all prove difficult to scale. But there is extensive academic research in how to motivate people. And so if we could just leverage, the past 30 years of research in educational psychology, we might just find some lessons and avoid reinventing wheels as much as we enjoy reinventing wheels in the security community. And so one of these tools that we can use is called communities of practice. And so there's a researcher by the name of Wegener and a number of other contributors who came up with this idea. And it sounds incredibly obvious, right? That communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic, and who deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on a regular basis. So you can probably immediately think of several communities of practice that you're already a part of. Well, the idea is that we as security professionals want to foster communities of practice around security initially inside of our organizations. And so how do we go about doing that, right? Well, it's difficult. No amount of management support and even no amount of urgency can actually make these communities of practice spring into being. Wegener goes into 7 different principles that are useful for growing communities of practice, but I'll just kind of hone in on a few things. One is that you don't so much architect a community of practice as you do shepherd it. You basically build, the infrastructure, the roads and the various, meeting points for people, and allow them to populate it and encourage them to populate it. If you try to over-engineer it, it doesn't actually feel alive. It's a dead space that people, will, not instinctively go to for camaraderie and to learn more about security or other topics. Also, you need to make sure that you really keep an eye on value, that you make it valuable for the participants. Otherwise, they have no reason to return. There's a lot of challenges in building these communities of practice. You have geography, people separated by space. You have time. It's difficult to get people together. They may be in different parts of the organization and so have difficulty sharing knowledge with each other because of various proprietary proprietary information concerns or whatnot. There's any number of challenges, but I think the things I would drive home is that there is so much value, right, in encouraging people to share information that it's worth the pain of you as the security professional and as the sort of shepherd of the community of practice to actually jump through those hoops and find solutions to those problems to get disparate parts of your organizations the ability to communicate. It's also a good way to, now that you have this idea, this research-backed idea that supports the interchange of communication, you can use it to support getting people face-to-face who are geographically separate, getting budget to actually get people in a room together, because there's really no substitute in terms of generating intimacy between people other than getting them face-to-face in a room together. Yep. And so can we measure it? And so you have to be careful with measurement as it concerns communities of practice. It can be very detrimental to the community. So if you just roll out some sort of computer-based quizzing in order to determine if these people know about security now more than they did before, you can actually damage your fledgling community of practice. The best way to go about this verges on the anecdote, right, in terms of gathering data to tell a story in order to describe causality in the community of practice that actually caused your organization to improve, right? And so the way we get that to be a systematic process and something we can rely on is through rigorous collection of data, right? Actually gathering artifacts from email lists, Slack rooms, face-to-face meetings, taking notes. In doing that, you need to be careful. Communities of practice need both public and private spaces in order to share. So public spaces are great because, whether it's a conference or a meeting or a conference call, they drive action, right? They're a deadline that people need to meet. But people also need those back channels. They need the opportunity to express ideas that they're not sure about, that they're not sure it's a good idea. They don't necessarily trust themselves. So they need an opportunity to be vulnerable in a trusted space before they can bring it forth on one of those deadlines, one of those in-person meetings or one of those conference calls. The next step, the pro move, is once you have actual security communities of practice operating in your organization, is to start allowing those individuals to participate in the community at large, right? And so there's more and more both structured and unstructured opportunities for organizations to trade information. So whether it's a very structured organization like the threat exchange, or whether it's very unstructured in terms of just encouraging non-security staff to attend security events or meetups or whatnot, basically building extended knowledge systems by allowing your communities of practice, by encouraging your communities of practice to link up with other existing communities of practice in the larger organization. And so this is essentially, now you have this opportunity to put a handle, on a tool that you can use in dealing with people and sort of give actual shape to a manner in which we can actually change this shared reality that we experience. So this is where we begin to close out the talk. One of the more important lessons to remember is that if you do block without purpose, without urgency, without actual interest from the organization, then you will get routed around, and that will be obviously detrimental to your cause. But we think that embracing DevOps and embracing continuous deployment and Agile, it doesn't actually harm security. It's neutral in that regard and can very much improve security if you embrace it and take advantage of the various silver linings that it presents. Visibility is the key to moving quickly. You need to surface issues and allow individuals in the organization who have authority to make those changes. And then you, in the general case, you're never going to hire enough security engineers to find all of your issues. And so you really have to do everything you can to steal everyone else's effort, to steal everyone else's staff in order to drive security throughout the entire organization. And so thank you for listening, and this is our contact information. And security begins with you. Remember that.